In a world of absolute BS Tottenham predictions after relegation, I'm actually going to make a video on what I think their squad will really look like, taking into account realistic possibilities, player contracts, and what typically occurs when a team gets relegated. I'm going to split this whole video up into a bunch of different segments, and the first place I want to start is the most obvious: the players who are going to be released and the players who are going to be sold with relegation or without it. That list is made up of Ben Davies and Yus Bissouma, who are going to leave for all their contracts expiring, Radu Dragusin, who's been either injured or completely out of form since signing, and I really am surprised he's still here, probably only sticking around because of our injury crisis. Next up is Rodrigo Bentancur, who's probably the most 50-50 player in this segment, but with his complete inability to stay fit, I'd imagine Spurs would have been looking to move him on in the summer, despite his obvious talent. And of course, to a lesser extent, Kinski, who will almost certainly be sent out on loan after his disastrous 60 minutes against Atletico Madrid, which I think has cemented that decision. To predict where these guys are actually going to end up is basically impossible, but I'll have a stab at it for fun either way. One thing to note first, though, which more or less applies for everyone I talk about in this video, is that it actually won't be too hard for Spurs to move players on. Spurs players already have salaries low compared to the club's status as a top 10 richest clubs in the world, and coupled with the 50% relegation wage drop that Levy put in basically every player's contract, it becomes even more apparent. On top of that, most of these players, no matter how bad they're playing right now, still retain value, as I think it's accepted most of them are good players who are simply just lacking in confidence and form. Either way, I'd imagine Dragusin goes to Roma, who've had long-standing interest in him for about £15 million. Kinski could literally go out on loan anywhere in Europe, but I think West Ham have been most interested. I don't know, I could see him go to like Rennes or something like that though. Bissouma and Bentancur will go to Turkey, and Ben Davies to Wrexham. Why not? Now we move on to the guys who likely would have been kept if it weren't for their awful form and breakup in relationship between player and club we've seen so far this season, and I imagine we'll probably sell even if we stay up just because they've been so bad for us. That list includes Romero, who's been stated as available for purchase by Fabrizio Romano and multiple people inside the club. It doesn't really come as a surprise to me. No one really seems to have given up on the club more than the captain himself. I'd imagine at least £40 million will do the trick, even while applying a relegation discount, given that he does have 3 years left on his contract after just signing at the end of last season. But honestly, it could be more than £40 million. Atletico does seem like the obvious choice for that price though. Next up is Pedro Porro, and I do feel a bit bad about this because he's a player who's obviously always had quality, but a lot of the time that quality can be cancelled out by a lot of rash tendencies that he has. And so far this season, those tendencies have only gone up in frequency, while the quality has been increasingly hard to spot. He's always divided opinions at the club, and with only 2 years left on his contract and pretty bad form this season, as well as a lot of interest from Europe, I'd imagine it's a player Spurs will be open to selling this summer, and especially with relegation. Then Vicario. Similar to Porro, Vicario in my mind is still an unbelievable shot stopper, but his outright atrocious distribution has been put on display more than ever this season, along with some very sketchy moments in general. Vicario has had long-standing interest from Inter Milan, and the relationship between him and Spurs has soured to a point that it seems inevitable that the player leaves with or without relegation. I'll say about £25 million for him to go to Inter. Next up, Richarlison. Weirdly, Richarlison might be the only player on the side to have actually improved despite the historically bad season he's involved in. Either way, his wages are some of the highest at the club, and he's only got a year left on his contract by the end of the season. So despite the improvements, they've been too marginal to justify keeping him around if we get relegated. He's previously rejected moves to Saudi Arabia, which would have been my top choice, but I genuinely wouldn't be surprised to see him move back to a Premier League side, likely at a cut price of like £25 million. Perhaps Villa, who like versatile strikers, or maybe even a romantic move back to Everton. Okay, so next up is the tough part. The players I believe will only move in case of relegation. This is the part where I'm going to have to distinguish between 3 different categories. 1, players who will leave permanently, likely by forcing move and don't have contracts long enough for Spurs to justify keeping them around. 2, players who want to leave, however may have long contracts, or only just recently joined the club, and instead will be sent out on a 1-year loan with deals that probably have the option to become permanent if Spurs don't achieve automatic promotion. And then 3, players who will stay begrudgingly or because they don't want to leave because they're young, settled, or previously backup players who are going to become key players after relegation. So I'm going to start back to front here because I think it's the easiest way of sorting this out, and this first section / category number 3 will give us the key spine of our squad. AKA, let's start with the guys who I think will stay. I discuss youth players currently out on loan in a separate part before I decide on what I think the squad will look like. Okay, so let's start with Archie Gray. He has championship experience, a contract until 2030, which will see him become untouchable, and he's at an age where one more year of championship football isn't going to be a detriment to his long-term career, maybe even a help. Then next up is Souza. He's been just signed directly for the first team, and he's shown some promising glimpses. There's no doubt he'll stick around at Spurs, and he'll likely be offered a more valuable role in the squad upon relegation. Then Lucas Bergvall. The only other option with Bergvall is a loan. There's absolutely zero chance Spurs are going to sell the Warner kid with 5 years left on his contract, and I think it's more likely he'll stick around to become a key player in North London. Then it's Wilson Odobert. I doubt he would have been sold already simply because the offers we would have received would have been less than our valuation for the French winger. However, on top of that, the recent ACL injury he's just picked up is all but ensured. No offers will be coming in for the Wonder Kid this summer, as he'll likely still be injured over the months of July and August. Then Brandon Austin, a simple one here. Austin's probably just going to move up from third choice to second choice upon relegation. Then Kevin Danso. This is where things get a little tougher to predict, starting with Danso. I'm very confident with the previous 5 predictions. However, now we're on to more established players. I decided I think Danso will stay. Whether he likes it or not, Spurs is realistically the pinnacle of where Danso can reach at this stage in his career. And let's not forget, his other option in January 2025 is Wolves, so I think it's fair to say relegation might have been inevitable for the guy. However, what's more important is that Danso was a player firmly brought in to play cover behind Van de Ven and Romero. However, the inevitable departure of those 2 players will give Danso an opportunity to become a starter. Yes, initially in the Championship, but more likely going forward in the Prem. He also has a contract until 2030. Then James Maddison. This one feels really hard to predict. However, the fact is Maddison has not played a single minute of football so far this season. Therefore, it seems completely unreasonable that a team would actually offer Spurs' likely asking price of like £30 million or so for the 28-year-old. On top of that, Maddison, despite his quality, can't exactly grumble at not getting a move, given that his stock has absolutely plummeted over the last 12 months. I think he'll begrudgingly accept to stay at Spurs, and on top of that, Maddison gives a vibe that he's very settled in at his home in London, so I think it's a decision he may be okay with. Okay, now we enter a gray area in my opinion. I have no doubt that Solanke will be desperate to leave alongside Sarr and Udogie, but their situations are complicated. First off, Spurs will be looking for championship experience in the form of high-quality players wherever they can, and Solanke offers that in abundance. In the case of Sarr, he has a contract until 2031, and his performances this season have probably put off a lot of potential suitors. Udogie as well has only mustered up 13 Premier League appearances this season and also has 4 years left on his contract, the same amount as Solanke, who's only made 10 appearances himself. It creates a situation where Spurs don't necessarily need to sell, while there's very likely going to be a lack of suitors that actually meet Spurs' asking price given their injury problems. I've decided that I think Solanke will stay for that reason, while Sarr and Udogie are young enough that they'll still attract suitors, bringing me to my next section, the loans. This is a part that I feel people are missing. Everyone seems to think it's going to be a case of either a player stays or they leave. Nothing in between. But that's just rarely the case when teams go down. Typically when sides get relegated, their best newly signed players are loaned out for a season as the team attempts to achieve immediate promotion. And if that promotion bid fails, then the players are allowed to leave permanently. And if they succeed, then the player comes back upon their return. This is a strategy I see Spurs using extensively with their talented players on long-term deals. So this will apply for all of Xavi Simons, Conor Gallagher, Mohamed Kudus, Udogie, and Masia and Tel in my opinion, all of whom will be desperate to ensure they don't ever touch the grass of a championship pitch. However, are all in very difficult positions to secure permanent moves away from their employers, given their 4 to 6 year long contracts. Finally, I'll move on to the last section, which is players I think Spurs will only sell in the event of relegation, and that includes 3 players: Mickey Van de Ven, Jed Spence, and Pape Matar Sarr. Van de Ven simply because he is one of Spurs' only consistent performers and has a 3-year-long contract, which is too long to force Tottenham to sell for a cut price fee, but too short for a loan. On top of that, the interest in the Flying Dutchman will be too great to force him to stay. Sarr, on the other hand, has a long contract until 2031. However, I think Spurs would have stuck it out with the midfielder given his age and undeniable talent. Relegation will probably see Spurs cut their losses and sell him while they can still get good value out of him. It was a toss-up in truth between a loan and a permanent sale. However, Sarr reportedly wants to leave, and he's not so important to Spurs to force him to stay contracted to them. Then Spence, who I really like as a player, although it seems the Spurs hierarchy don't as much, and it seems as though we'll be happy to sell him for a reported £25 million fee, with Juventus most interested. Then, after all that, one man is left: Dejan Kulusevski. I waited this long to make a decision on the Swede because if there's one player who I still adore out of this miserable squad, it's Deki. I procrastinated for so long because as much as I would love to follow my heart and put him to stay, or even chuck him in the loan squad, my brain tells me realistically the Ginger leaves on a permanent deal. That's because he only has a contract until 2028, and after a season potentially out on loan, he comes back with only a year left and a cut price sale waiting him. Then again, after spending a season out on the sidelines, it might be most beneficial to loan him out and get him playing again before a sale, even if it means his contract is shorter upon sale time, just to get his value back up again. Fuck it. I'm gonna put him out on loan for a season just in the rare hopes that I see him play again in a Spurs shirt. So this is what the transfers out look like so far, just accounting for players currently at the club. We've got Ben Davies and Bissouma released to, say, Wrexham and Besiktas individually. For the players sold, Bentancur maybe 15 million to Fenerbahce, Dragusin 15 million to Roma, Romero 40 to 45 to Atleti, Porro 30 to 35. Could see any top side playing a 5 at the back or maybe a big Spanish side signing him. Vicario 20 to 25 million pounds to Inter Milan, Richarlison again 20 to 25, Everton or Villa perhaps. Van de Ven I'd say around 60, maybe 50. It could be any top European side like Barca, City, Bayern, Liverpool, all seeming like possible candidates for him. Spence about 25 million to Juventus, and then I said Sarr about 30 million to Galatasaray, who seem most interested at the moment. So that kind of sums it up to about 275 to 295 million pounds made just from sales. On top of that, the loans. We have Simmons, Gallagher, Kudus, Udogie, Tel, Kulusevski, and Kinski going on for about a season. Honestly, looking at this, I feel as though in my predictions, Spurs may have even sold less than I expect. People talk about relegation as if it's going to be absolutely catastrophic to the levels of Spurs being forced into gutting the entire squad to cover their losses. However, financially, Spurs have some of the most wiggle room in the entire world and are really prepared for relegation. However, despite that, I think the only change I would make in hindsight would be keeping Spence instead of selling him, but that's a personal one, and I think realistically the Spurs board will sell him. Well, that leaves one area left to be discussed then, and that's the current players Spurs have out on loan and what to do with them. I think it's inevitable that a lot of these guys will be incorporated back into the first team. Some could be sold, and many more will simply just be loaned out again. The list of players to my mind who could be in with a shout of first team action include Will Lange-style, Jamie Donnelly, Dane Scarlett, Ashley Phillips, Alfie Devine, Kota Takai, Mana Solomon, Min Hyuk Yang, Mikey Moore, Luka Vuskovic, George Abbott, and Tyrese Hull. However, the situations for all these guys vary drastically. I'm going to start off with the big one, Vuskovic. Despite all the desperate rumors linking Vuskovic away to Bayern or Barcelona before he even makes an appearance for the club, Spurs have absolutely zero need to sell the kid. However, I also don't think Spurs will keep him around in the championship though, and what's more likely is another loan move away. Even before Spurs' relegation scrap, Vuskovic went on record stating that what he felt was best was one more loan move away after HSV before being integrated into the first team. This could align nicely as it would mean Vuskovic would link back with the team upon their return to the Premier League, as long as they actually got promoted. So loan it is. Then the next biggest, Mikey Moore. Moore is doing very well with Rangers this season, a team akin about to a top 6 championship side in terms of quality in my opinion, and weirdly relegation could serve the perfect conditions for Moore to get a nailed-on spot in the Spurs side, which I think will happen if they get relegated. Moore stays. As for the rest of the players, it really depends on how much money Spurs will be willing to spend. To be honest, if Spurs make 260 to 280 million pounds, I could 100% see them splash around 100 million on new talent, meaning spots could be harder to find for the current crop of youth players out on loan. However, the only issue is that the 100 million they spend in the championship wouldn't go as far as the 100 mil spent in the Prem, as they will inevitably only be able to attract a lower level of players. Meaning Spurs may look to rely more on what they have left in their team and save money for promotion. However, I do think that's less likely, and Spurs will probably just do what they can to get promoted straight away. In my opinion, Spurs will make a few deals for high quality players with championship experience, probably the kind of player that could be playing in the Prem, but will be willing to hold on a year for the allure of starting for a club like Spurs, and the rest will follow in Spurs' strategy of picking up young players from around the world. I'll get onto who these guys are later, but this will affect who I think will be kept. The rest of them I'll sum up like this. Scarlett will probably end up leaving on a permanent this summer after a collection of poor loan spells. Lange-style I think will stay. Spurs will need to sign another striker, but having Lange-style as a third choice with Solanke's injury unreliability or someone to bring off the bench will be a good option. Donnelly, like Lange-style, has enough quality to play a role on the side, even if it's as backup to Maddison in the 10, Donnelly stays. Takai and Phillips will stay as Spurs' only other first-team centre-back will be Danso, and Phillips has a lot of championship experience at a young age. Devine also stays because the championship season is a long one, and even if we sign, say, 2 more midfielders on top of Gray and Bergval, we are going to need that extra depth from the player doing very well for Preston this season. I think Hull gets another low move despite his excellent form, simply because he's currently playing at League 2 level, and the step up may be slightly too much for a team that will need automatic promotion. But then again, I wouldn't complain if we kept it around and played him, as he's a very talented player. I also think we'll loan out Abbott for a similar reason. Matter Solomon is a tough one because he actually does have experience of getting promoted from the Championship and was very good for Leeds the season they achieved that. But he's also a player we've been trying to sell for ages. I honestly think we might as well keep him, that is, if Fiorentina don't exercise their option to buy, especially with Moore and injured Alderweireld as the only current options on the wings. And I think Yang will stick around even if we sign another winger, chiefly because we'll need somebody else while Alderweireld nurses back to health at the beginning of the season. So that leaves the squad looking something like this. You can pause the video here, I'll just talk about it for a second. I'm just going to assume we line up in a 4-2-3-1. I think Pochettino would maybe still be interested in joining, even if we got relegated, so let's just say we have him for shits and giggles. But as you can see, we're going to need a goalkeeper, a left back, a center back, a right back, 2 midfielders, a right winger, and a striker at least. Maybe some other players sprinkled around. So that's what we're going to go for. It is next to impossible to predict what Spurs would actually do, but I'm going to have a good guess at it. I'm going to combine a bit with what they currently do already under Johan Lange, which is mostly signing very high potential young players from around the world, alongside what I think they should do, which is essentially sign ready-made players who are too good for the Championship. I've got to say, for the latter picks, these will all be controversial, as these players will essentially be picking between playing for a lower half Premier League side or a Championship-bound Spurs side. And it's really a decision that comes down to a player's personal preference. Let me remind you that the season Newcastle went down with Rafa Benitez, they managed to pull off the signing of Matt Ritchie from Bournemouth that season, who was one of their best players in their promotion to the Prem, as the two sides swap places. It just shows that despite relegation, the reputation of a side can still attract better players than you should be able to for that level. So let's kick it off in the midfield. For my first pick, I'm going to go with Hayden Hackney. A Middlesbrough promotion would complicate things, obviously. However, if they fail to do so, I have no doubt the star man of the Championship will be willing to join Spurs. He's certainly one of those guys who fits the too good for the Championship category, but given that he's only 23, I don't think he'll mind sitting around another year in the Championship for a chance to be a key figure in Tottenham's future Premier League side. If a contract only has 1 year left in it by the end of the season, I'd imagine that Hackney could go for as little as £20 million if Middlesbrough fail to get promoted, and more like 30 if they achieve it. And yes, I do think he'd still join Spurs even if they secured promotion. It would be the most controversial transfer of the window, and I don't know the man personally, but I think there's a good chance that anyone would do it in his position. The second midfielder is more outside the box, and it's for a player who's just seen January bids of around €20 million rejected from both Nottingham Forest and Ajax. That man is Johan Lange's dream, 22-year-old Japanese sensation Kodai Sano. Sano is a very rare mix of excellent defensively, superbly technical, with great close control and dribbling ability, as well as the knack of routinely creating chances for his teammates. We really could play him anywhere, but he would be most beneficial in the 8 position, so more or less rotation with Bergvall, and provided he only gets better given his age, he should be more than ready for the Premier League. Other options I considered were Morten Frendrup and D. Amarim. Now at right back, I've actually been considering going for a man with former glory days at Lane, and that could be either Walker or Trippier. I think the experience will be incredibly useful in such a young side, and their age wouldn't be such a detriment playing in the second division. Both are honestly probably available and willing to join even with relegation on the cards, but the difference between the two is that Walker would still have another year left on his deal at Burnley, whilst Trippier's contract is coming to an end this season, and it wouldn't make sense to spend money on a 35-year-old Walker, so Trippier it is. I have to say, I'm tempted to not sign another right back and just have Gray play there the times Trippier isn't available. That's partly because they'll leave more room in the squad upon promotion to sign a better player without actually having to sell anyone, and the best young options like Palestra are all out of reach upon relegation. So you know what? With the 2 midfield reinforcements, I think I feel comfortable doing that. I'm going to skip to the wing now, where I feel we need a better right winger in particular. For that position, I'm going to go with Abdul Fatawu. Currently playing for Leicester, Fatawu missed his opportunity for the Premier League spotlight and likely a big move due to an ACL injury he picked up. Despite that, he's been electric as ever for a shocking Leicester side. He has experience in promotion, he's still young at 22, and in reality, he's a Premier League level player that should have been playing in the first division years ago. Leicester, previously unwilling to sell, will have to now given their dire financial situation, and I imagine a transfer could be as low as £20 million, maybe up to 25. Going to the striker competition for Solanke now, I've gone for a second Japanese player, and one from Johan Lange's school of obscurity. That is Guseke Goto, of course. The Japanese forward is only 20 years old and has been excellent up front for STVV in Belgium this season, securing 10 goals and 5 assists for the mid-table side. He's actually already been linked with us and will reportedly cost around £15 million from his parent club Anderlecht. He's a rare mix of tall but technically gifted and would be a great player to grow alongside the rest of our young squad. For the centre-back, I've gone for Maxime Esteve of Burnley. Now, I'm not so easily convinced that Esteve isn't a Premier League level player, despite Burnley's poor season so far. Ask any Burnley fan, he's been one of the few stand-up players of their deflating season, and one they'd be really sad to see go. He was, of course, the best defender in the league last year in Burnley's promotion campaign, and he follows a similar mold to departing Mickey van de Ven with a natural left foot and steering pace. I think he costs maybe £20 to £25 million following Burnley's own relegation, and he'd be a great pickup for us. At left back, just to bounce out the books, I've gone cheap with Dennis Serkin. I don't feel as though we need anyone outwardly brilliant in quality given we already have a good option in Sousa. We just need someone dependable, and following Sunderland's promotion last year, Serkin has proved to be that in the second division. I don't think he'd be a long-term player at the club, but with his contract expiring at the end of the season, as well as being a Spurs Academy graduate, I see no reason why we couldn't persuade him to join us for nothing. And lastly, in goal, I've kind of gone balls to the wall in the Johan Lange Wonderkid department. I probably shouldn't be taking this big of a risk on a 19-year-old for the goalkeeper spot, but why not? Brendan Austin is a safe enough pair of hands if things go wiry. Either way, it's because I've opted for La Masia Academy gem, Diego Cochin. I think if we offered £10 million, Barcelona would snap our hands off for a guy that hasn't actually played senior minutes yet, but the potential is something that will make Lang cry tears of happiness. He's probably the best ball-playing goalkeeper at a young age in the world right now, and I think it's worth taking a risk in the long term, especially considering that we'll probably be dominating possession in most games in the championship. So with all that, we have a squad looking like this. Goalkeeper Cochin and Austin, left back Sousa Serkin, left centre back Esteve and Takai, right centre back Danzo and Phillips, right back Trippier or Gray filling in, left centre mid Bergvall and Sano, right centre mid Gray and Hackney. Devine can back up both positions. At cam we have Madison and Donnelly. Williams Barnett can also play there and I think he would get some minutes. Left wing Moore and Solomon. Williams Barnett can also play there. Right wing Odebear and Fatawu with Yang being able to play there as well. And strikers Solanke and Goto with Lancashire being the third choice. And if we really wanted to look into the future, it's probably a bit unrealistic, but upon players returning from loan and our first season back in the Prem, the squad would look something like this in an ideal world. In goal, Kinski, Cochin and Austin. Left back, Udogi is back with Sousa. Left centre back, Esteve again with Takai or Phillips. Right centre back, Vuskovic is back with Danzo as well. Right back, Gray, and we'll probably sign another right back. Left centre mid, Bergvall and Sano again. Right centre mid, Gallagher's back, so him and Hackney. Cam, Simmons and Kulusevski and Madison. Left wing, Moore, Odebear, Tel. Right wing, Kudus, Kulusevski, Fatawu. Striker, Goto, Solanke, and Tel. So that wraps it up. It's a very big hypothetical in a lot of ways, but I'm pretty happy with the result, and I believe it's a realistic outcome if Spurs were to actually get relegated. I get a lot of this will be controversial, but I wouldn't have said any of it if I didn't think it could happen, and I do think this dissection does a better job than most other discussions on the topic. Anyways, thank you all for watching, have a good one.